Black history is American history. I 100% agree, and we should have it fully integrated. Should be part of it. It should not be relegated to the shortest month of the year. Just want to get that out. History is a warning from the future, and if we're to learn anything from history, it's that we never learn from history, and false history leads to false lessons. While it is written by the victors and remembered by the vanquished, it is erased by those looking to repeat it. I agree. Black history should be integrated, and I fully reject the Darwinian construct of race, which is actually a phenotype. But for me today, it is difficult to consider this resolution from the majority of the body politic as this body politic endlessly imposes its aim for a more equitable servitude through ever-growing compelled labor, the abolition of private property to recreate Marx's idyllic feudal system of slavery, and the never-ending efforts of disarming its citizens. It is the imposing of overtly oppressive laws and policies designed to separate and disenfranchise in the present while condemning it in the past, promoting the slavery of equity by destroying equality under the law, and undermining the values of freedom for which our soldiers fought and died. Ironically, we are currently in the midst of the closest thing to the abolition of the Second Amendment and thereafter all the amendments, which is presented as a mere cleanup bill, which historically are a prelude to the mopping up of historic genocides. Another famous historical gentleman observed, any unarmed people are slaves and are subject to slavery at any moment. If the guns are taken from out of the hands of the people and only the pigs have guns, then off to the concentration camps, the gas chambers, or whatever the fascists in America have come up with. One of the democratic rights of the United States, the Second Amendment of the Constitution, gives the people the right to bear arms. However, there is a greater right, the right of human dignity, that gives all men the right to defend themselves. Too much of what I see of Black history has devolved into a religion of victimhood, and that is upsetting. Perhaps the most pernicious idea is that whites have always been oppressors, and those of darker skin have always been oppressed, which completely ignores the Moors' conquer of Spain and rule of it for over 700 years. This perpetuation of victimhood is a form of white supremacy that robs agency as a means of escaping the cycle, except through beneficent provision in exchange for fealty. This also leads to the fool's errand of solving past racism with present racism and present racism with future racism. And we should talk about history. We should talk about how the United States there were no United States before 1789. How ending a scourge as old as history is messy, complicated, and expensive, and cost many their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. As it is considered something that needs to be dismantled, I would like to cite Frederick Douglass in his declaring, in that instrument, the U.S. Constitution, I hold there is neither warrant, license, nor sanction of the hateful thing, slavery. But interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Is it at the gateway? Or is it in the temple? It is neither. I think we should also talk about the many heroes of the Revolutionary War, men of color, great bravery, intellect, and strength, who were critical in the defeat of the British-imposed slavery, which was one of the Revolutionary War's primary purposes. But we need to have a unified narrative. Well, what we need to do is we need to have an unvarnished look at history, because history is messy. But we can't learn from history if we only learn a partial history. Part of what I would have changed in here is, because it talked about it, we could talk about the history of slavery began in our own region. Here. Ute and Cherokee captured and enslaved members of other tribes. Spanish colonists from Cenedueva, New Mexico, 1598 to 1548, enslaved Native Americans after colonizing northward after the defeat of the Aztec Empire. Colorado became a territory in 1848, but was delayed in statehood until 1876 when it was signed in by Union General President Ulysses S. Grant. Part of the delay was because of the admirable requirement for suffrage for Americans of African descent. So I think we have a great heritage in that for Colorado. So I'm not going to talk about everything, But we could talk about how the 3/5 compromise, limited Democrat representation in Congress, slaveholders wanted a 1, abolitionists wanted a 0. That compromise allowed for the defeat of slavery with the 13th Amendment. Yet I'm often told that the 3/5 compromise is diminutive. We could discuss the eugenic vision of Margaret Sanger and her founding of the organization that has rendered over 20 million black lives into saleable and discardable parts and continues to do so with 50% of the black pregnancies. So some might recall last year that I didn't vote for Black History Month because I felt it hypocritical to stand alongside subsidizing slavery and eco-rape in the present, and I still do. We're subsidizing on the backs of the poor, in the poorest of countries, on the backs of children, EV toys for the rich and superstitious on the backs of the working poor. EVs are subsidized at $50,000 per vehicle. The top 20% of earners get 80% of the credit. The bottom 60% get 60% of the credit. This is a form of compelled labor. And so it makes it difficult for me to stand and take this resolution seriously when we are imposing in the present what we're condemning in the past. So we asked to sign the resolution. It was rejected multiple times to protect the children, to make sure that we don't give money, we don't subsidize slavery with our Colorado tax dollars, and it was rejected. All for mathematically, and I won't go through, well, it's 10% of 0.125 over 3,200 of 40 degrees, about 1/10,000th of 1 degree Celsius. That is why this body politic is continually imposing slavery on the rest of the world and piling it onto the backs of the working class in America. So it's difficult to see this. And so what I'd like to read is from a friend who I'd love to see in one of these seats, from a proud melanated constituent who was just done with the shenanigans at our Capitol. Let's hone in on this. The crux of the issue with Black history is that we are no longer engaged in learning historical achievements of black people. In 2025, the House defames black historical achievement by replacing it with Marxist ideology. Instead of supporting the black family, educational institutions, sound faith traditions, black practices, media history, political heritage, cultural norms, the Marxists are replacing those proud black cultural norms. The black family is being dismantled by trained Marxists who are against the black nuclear family. The black education traditions are being replaced with Marxist indoctrination and pitting blacks against one another in class warfare. The black faith movement of the civil rights era is being torn down and replaced with a criminality as leadership, the state as deity, and wickedness instead of good character. And anyone who opposes these is labeled racist. She goes on, what happened to MLK's dream? MLK said before he died, his dream had become a nightmare because people had not woken up to the fact that we should be judging by the content of the character instead of the color of the skin. I need desperately, she concludes, for the Black Caucus to stop giving us fake black history and giving lawmakers support. This is black Coloradans in their deserved status of equality. It is these Marxists who hold Colorado's black community back from their rights by fighting against laws of liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is kind of where I started. I am for black history. I'm against these so-called policies that violate the spirit of that history, which should be taught to us. Government in Colorado serves the donor class instead of those for whom black history is supposed to honor.
Representative DeGraaf.
Yes, ma'am.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I could not agree more, but since it is unlikely we'll have an honest conversation, I would like to have concluded this bill with something a little more unifying, and to this end, black Coloradans continue to advocate and champion the ideas of our founding, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is only when we secure these rights for others that we can all breathe free. And the Colorado General Assembly recognizes that we cannot learn valid lessons from false or partial history, and recognizes February 2025 as Black History Month as a time to celebrate the rich cultural heritage and contributions by Americans of African descent to the cultural tapestry of Colorado and the United States. Now, take the Constitution according to its plain reading. I defy a presentation of a single pro-slavery clause. On the other hand, I will found to contain principles, purposes entirely hostile to the existence of slavery.
Representative DeGraaf, your time has expired.
Thank you, Madam.